And please welcome Jim Sheridan.
Thank you.
We will go through Jim Sheridan's filmography. We will deal with topics like acting, different periods, writing, and so on. This masterclass is open to your questions, so please raise your hand if you want to ask a question, or leave it, and there in the end I hope there will be enough time to answer all your questions. My name is Jim Sheridan, and I'm a storyteller. That's the opening line of a true crime series, Murder at the Cottage, brand new on HBO. And that's the way how you define yourself, storyteller.
Yeah. Well, they were asking me, and I suppose that's what I came up with, you know. Yeah, storyteller, I suppose, yeah.
So let's start with writing, where storytelling begins. What is your method? How do you proceed in the very beginning?
Oh, you know, for me, there's no fixed method. I'm not a writer in the sense of I would write books or poetry. In fact, I find it difficult to imagine writing poetry, because I don't think I could conceivably be able to capture what I want to in words, you know. Words are too elusive, and you could start me on that and I could talk for an hour. But basically, the first big revolution in technology was the Gutenberg press, which printed the Bible and basically dominated Europe through the word of God from a pulpit with a man speaking. The effect of the Gutenberg Bible was to remove images from the church. So in many ways, the verbal, the words eliminated the old images, you know. Also happened in silent movies. But for instance, in the church, the concept of the Virgin was removed from the church. And because I think it's probably a necessary image for most people, the Virgin then popped up in the court, which was the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. So sometimes you can't suppress things that are deep in people. So I'm not really a wordy writer, you know what I mean? I'm more like trying to get an X-ray of what I feel is reality and put it on the screen.
And is it handy then to have someone who is dealing with dialogues, dealing with words only, so you can collaborate on it this way? For instance, some of your early Irish films were co-written by Terry George. At least 3 or 4 collaborations were. So how did this work specifically?
Well, you know, to say that I don't trust the words doesn't mean that I don't write the dialogue. It just means that I might engage in a conflict with Terry about what would be in the film. I'd write some scenes, he'd write some scenes. But I have a very, you know, it's kind of contradictory making a movie. Somebody like Scorsese or, you know, any of those would be blindingly intense and have no patience and want to shoot, and like Scorsese did Raging Bull from the hospital because he wasn't well. Probably he was doing too much weight stuff or something, I don't know, but he was in hospital all the time and De Niro was taking him out. So kind of to be a director, you need to have immense patience and no patience. Do you know what I mean? You have to have no patience for scenes that are too long and dialogue that's too long, and immense patience for the long haul. So it's two things at once. So trying to cut it down into easy sound bites, you know, to teach is very difficult. Like I went to a class from the most famous teacher of screenwriting. I can't remember his name now, but he did these classes, and he was brilliant at analyzing the movies. But sometimes he would miss the most obvious, simple thing, you know. And, you know, at the end he said, you're right for a star. Like, you imagine, because you're not going to get your movie made if you don't have Tom Cruise or Jack Nicholson or some star, Daniel Day-Lewis or Richard Harris. And you write for a star, and then you get the star and they make it. And I asked him, did he never see his own face on the character? And he said no. And I said, well, you know, if I write a movie and there's a dog barking, I see my face on the dog. Do you know what I mean? It's just a different way of being involved. So, but that's the way I am. I'm involved in it from trying to imagine that I'm walking in the shoes of the characters.
And several of your films are adaptations, like literary adaptations. There is also a remake, Susanne Bier film. So how do you find yourself in a book you are reading and maybe thinking of making it into a film?
Well, the latest book I was adapting, I got into trouble because I had never read it.
So the trouble was with the author, or?
No.
What kind of trouble was it?
The trouble was the author was writing the book and I was writing the film. And we were writing about the same subject matter. But once the studio, they read my scripts, they loved them, and then they saw the book, and then they said, you know, we have to be faithful to the actual events. And I said, but it's a fiction. And they were edgy, and they want to be more truthful because they're a bit scared of the subject matter. So it's all, like, Presumed Innocent was Jerry Conlon's book, but that was in the name of the father. And we stuck to some of the events, but some we just changed because you can't be sticking with everything that happened in reality. I don't think you can make a movie that way. I mean, by the very act of taking up the camera, you're not doing that anyway.
And for The Secret Scripture, it was Sebastian Barry book,
Yeah.
kind of a bestseller, right?
Yeah, it was a bestseller, but the actual truth of it is that the thing that made it a bestseller was the most difficult thing to make it a movie. I don't know if anybody has seen Secret Scripture or read the book. Anybody read the book?
The film will be screened tomorrow.
Yeah.
Here at the Summer Film School.
But that's what I mean by, but like, bestseller means what? That some people read it. It's just not. In the world of making movies, a bestseller means, I would say The Godfather was a small bestseller before they made The Godfather. But I think probably the film is a better, I knew Mario Puzo, and, you know, I've met him, and I think Coppola is a fantastic scriptwriter. And probably, I know he didn't stick to the book, you know? So it's just all material to make, I don't know, a clear story, you know? Like, I'm writing a story now about myself. So I realized coming on the train, sorry, not the train, the plane, and the drive and all, I realized I had to change myself. Does that make sense? And that part that I had to change was my childhood. And then I realized that's not really changing myself. Once I was a nice, innocent kid before I became an egotistical monster, you know what I mean? And so maybe it's not a change, but it's a rediscovery. But I had to do that in order for the audience to understand the evolution of the character. And I have to get away from myself. So I don't believe in any of this. Like for actors, they all, you know, some of them pursue this thing of finding the bedrock of the character. Like going back and did he have a mother and did he have a like it's nuts, you know, it's fucking nuts. It's Stanislavski nuts. It's like, that's not the way a character comes into being for a writer. For a writer, you find two people that have contradictory impulses or would never get along, and you make them one person. That's a character. It's not a character to pick somebody you know out of the crowd or even in reality and try and write them. It doesn't work. It's just not workable because there's no perspective. You know, in painting, the way you have perspective, a character who's just one person is like a painting without perspective. So there's no energy to it. There's no, like when Shakespeare rewrote Hamlet, he didn't bother changing the fact that Hamlet was 19. In the second draft, he's 39. And so in the play, he's both 19 and 39. And it doesn't matter. Bunwell casts a different woman in the same character. It doesn't matter. You're dealing with something, we all think it's reality, but it's not really reality. You know, it's a version of reality. And it's So you take the bit of coffee and the water and you pour them in the jug and then you put orange juice in and something else and then you put them on the stove and you turn up the heat and then you put a pressure cooker down on them and you hold the pressure cooker and if it starts jumping, that's a character. You know what I mean? Like if it starts being something that you can't control, then it's a character. But if it's something that you're controlling, writing like this, you know, that's not a character. That's a facsimile.
You mentioned writing about yourself. We should mention in this respect a film called In America, because this one was co-written by two of your daughters, and it's generally conceived to be your most personal film, maybe? Could you talk a little bit on this writing process?
Oh my God, I'm going to get into trouble. My kids were so young. My wife was very wise. And she said, look, you can't do a movie about yourself because you're already narcissistic enough. And you're already self-centered enough. And you should get the kids to give you their version. So they wrote, one of them was like 10. And the other was maybe 14. So they wrote about being in school and stuff like that. And then I took their stuff and tried to stay with the idea of kids. But in the movie, my eldest daughter is me. I'm my father. And it's all mixed up, you know? So, but the relief that you get in two ways from it not being totally you is very profound. Because if it's totally you, you're stuck, you know? You're like a fly pinned to the wall. And in Shakespeare's case, which, you know, unbelievably amazing writer, and it's his mistakes that tell you about how he worked. And like, if you imagine, James Joyce, the Irish writer, wrote a lot about Hamlet and mythology. And so European mythology had many branches. I suppose Greek, Roman, English, Czech, Bohemian, French, you know, many different branches that all go back down into a fundamental, probably Troy, you know, the blind poet writing. And Shakespeare then came along probably as the next, after the Greeks, he came as the next great mythologizer. And like, I just think of this a lot because he wrote Hamlet and he had a child called Hamlet. And Hamlet died in reality and he went to the funeral, which would be the distance from here to Prague, but by horse and cart. So that's a big journey in those days. That's like going to LA 4 times. So probably he'd never been back home. And I think something happened at the funeral. Now, James Joyce suggests all this, but never elaborates on it, other than to say that when Shakespeare got to the Globe Theatre and he walked in the door of the pub, everybody in the pub went, "Revenge me, revenge me," almost like Darth Vader, you know? And there was something in those words that struck a chord with everybody in that society. Because Shakespeare wasn't a revenge writer. Revenge is too easy and too true crimey a motif or a genre for somebody as refined as Shakespeare. So it's kind of like the only revenge he wrote. And Joyce said that he left his wife the second best bed, and that where Will had a will, Anne had a way. And so he imagine, so he is doing a play and he takes it out and he rewrites it. And if you look at Orson Welles and Peter O'Toole talking about Hamlet, they both admit that the ghost is the most important character. And Shakespeare played the ghost. And he had to go to the costumes and take out the iron suit and walk in to his son who's dead. So the son is dead. He's alive. In the play, he's dead and the son is alive. And so that reversal of the actuality, I think, gave him a lightning bolt. It's his first great work. And the lightning bolt was to see life from way above and as if the child still existed. And I don't know why he was obsessed with it, but the result was everybody says Shakespeare's Hamlet. And I kind of posed the question, what if the child wasn't his? Is that the revenge? In other words, if you went to a funeral, I'm not saying this happened, but if you went to a funeral and somebody said, "Why are you crying?" And you went, "Whoa." Now you have the choice of whether you accept the child as yours or reject it, even though it's dead. And you've lived with this emotion that it was your child. And the play is full of that. All his plays are full of brothers who sleep with a wife and all this stuff. Bit like Raging Bull. But it's so consistent when Shakespeare that you go, I wonder what the narrative of his life was. So when you find a theme like Hamlet, which is Oedipal revenge, but in a kind of weird way, you stick with that. You know, you stick with the story. My story, as opposed to, like, say, my brother who writes, is a bit Oedipal as well. But, you know, like, sometimes I look at movie makers who are great, like Kubrick, and I think his story is the mother never protected him. You know what I mean? It's the same story in every movie. The Shining, 2001. It's kind of all these male authority figures that shouldn't have authority. And pretty brilliant, you know, but hidden.
I really like the way you think in this broader context when mentioning mythology, Shakespeare, Kubrick, Scorsese, or whoever else. Where did this start? Was it there already in your theater times, or when you started doing films, or has it come later during the career?
Well, I think, you know, when I looked at Irish literature in college, where I came from a very poor background, and I was the first kid in college from that area. And I kind of studied the writers, and I was like, yeah, each Irish writer that was profound and I felt was going to last, always had a knowledge of Greek theatre or Greek poetry, or, you know, they understood the Greeks and they incorporate, because the Irish mythology structure was smashed. And it's like a tree without roots, because for hundreds of years no stories were told, no paintings were made. Like, the Irish stayed in smoke-filled rooms because the Queen of England put a tax on chimneys, and they put a tax on windows. So they put a slate over the window and a slate on the chimney. They wouldn't have to pay tax. And so they lived in these smoke-filled rooms where reality was outside. If you ever see The Searchers, John Wayne, you know when he goes to the door and you see the big valley? That's the way the Irish see. It's kind of like, it's like they couldn't go out on plein air to paint because the weather wasn't good enough. They couldn't paint in a bourgeois Dutch style because there was no bourgeois. So there was no art form up to the 20th century that the Irish could actually engage in because of power and economics. So I think a lot of art comes out of that, out of access to the power and the economics, you know? And right now we've just got one culture dominating the narrative, which is America. And for its own sake, it's become ill. And the illness is this fucking American hero is going to save the world. As if. I mean, yeah, you know, like, finally put on the fucking Marvel suit and go to Ukraine.
Do you have any questions about screenwriting? Or we might shift to maybe another topic. Any question about scripts and screenwriting? There is one. So wait for the mic, please. Mic will arrive, so we will, over there. Please raise your hand again. Yeah.
Okay, hey, sorry. I just wanted to ask, you said that you don't write poetry because...
You lost them.
Okay.
No, you're going back. No, you need to.
Okay, I guess. So, yeah. So you said that you don't write poetry because you don't know how to translate your, I don't know, emotions into words. So how come you are able to transfer your emotions into movies, I guess? What's the difference?
Movies are a more exact science, you know. I remember I'll tell you a story which is not funny, but might be illustrative. I was doing a movie for a Hollywood studio, mini studio, and they wanted to do a reshoot. And we had a writer and an editor, and we worked for many weeks on the story. And then the guy who ran the studio had his own writer secretly. And I was like, are you out of your mind? Like, you've had somebody writing in secret. And so, but he had control, he run the studio. So to try and make sense out of this, we got in a room, and his writer was a friend of Charlie Sheen, Do you know Charlie Sheen? All right, well, that should tell you everything you need to know about his friend. And the other writer was a very, you know, dedicated, good journeyman writer. And they were writing away, and I was like, oh, fuck. I was so fed up, I couldn't even deal with it. And they wanted to get lunch. And the lunch took a long time to organize. You know, it was like, I want the hot dog, and I want the burger, and I want this and that. And the Charlie Sheen writer ordered a certain type of burger and fries, and, you know. And the main guy ordered something else, and they all ordered. And I was like, this is not going to work. Because the guy taking the order was about 33 years of age. Now, it's back a few years. And he was a gay man, and he was very nervous. And I knew he's nervous, and that doesn't work on a movie, nerves, you know? And so, like, even with your mic, I'm watching, and I kind of knew your mic was back on, because I don't usually get nervous in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, I kind of can be outside and inside, and you're like that on a movie, and you're like, oh, come on. So the man who was to get the food went out the door, and I went out to pretend to go to the loo. And when he came out, I said, can you show me the order? And it was like your book there. So I took a pen and I wrote down exactly what I wanted. So the order came back. I took the food, and the man who was the Charlie Sheen guy, he was like, this is not what I ordered. And everybody was like, wow. And he was like, I didn't order this. And then he looked around at the guy who ran the company, who was eating a piece of burger. And he said, I ordered that. So the guy who ran the company put the burger back down and pushed it to him and said, well, you have that. And I thought, he's not going to eat it with the bite out. You know what I mean? So it was like a power situation. And he picked up the burger and started to eat it, you know? And I just looked at him like, and he lost it. He went crazy. And he said to the poor guy who was ordering, he said, do you not know what raw animal is? And the guy was like, sorry, sir. He said, raw animal. Do you not know raw animal? And the guy's like, no, sir. Raw animal seemingly was like, raw animal is a fucking burger patty with no bread, raw onions, fries with nothing fucking on them. And he went through a whole list. And the kid said, but I'm a vegetarian, sir. Right? I took the pen, and they had a board, and I wrote interior house day. And then I said to them, look, there's 3 words that you have to get right in a movie. You have about 400 words for the food, and you can't get the food right. So how are you going to write the screenplay? And it doesn't matter whether you can write poetry or prose. You have to get it exactly right, know what its interior is where we are, lighting is day, and house is the description. And a screenplay is like that. It's so practical. And probably each page costs, well, in a normal American budget, each page would cost 200 grand to film. So each page might be like 400 words. So each word is like 5 grand. It's not like you can go to the coffee shop and sell a poem for 200 grand, you know what I mean? So it's actually an industry, do you know what I mean? And it suits some people. So writing is like, you know, it's hard because I can write for actors, do you know what I mean? But I'm not sure I could write for TV where every week you'd have a new series. But I can get into a story and write the scene that will determine the whole movie, which is what I'm always looking for, just one scene. And usually I find that through anger and frustration in my earlier life, and it comes and it explains everything. So at the same time as you have structure, interior, house, day, really chaos explains everything much better than any logic. You know what I mean? So if you want to explain Northern Ireland, stop with the Protestants and Catholics. The minute you start that, you're dead. You're the Catholics over here, you're the Protestants over here. You all look the same, except he has an odd T-shirt that looks like an English one. But it's some band, right? But like, there's no way to explain this. But if you just have chaos, you can see the structure of the society revealed through the chaos. Because the chaos tells you why, what's the deviation from the normal. And it explains, you know? Anyway, does that sound too complicated?
I don't direct in most of the cases. That's your favorite answer to a question, how do you direct actors? Especially in case of Daniel Day-Lewis, we have stated many times that casting is 99% of directing actors. Does it work always like this? Like especially on projects where, let's say, actors or actresses are changed in the very last moment before the shoot starts?
Yeah, I'd say that's really difficult if you have to change an actor. I had to do that in one movie, and the guy was good, but if I was doing it again, I wouldn't do it, you know? Its casting is 90%. You know, actors are so... they're so good and so, you know, trained and have so much experience that they can mostly do, if you cast them right, whatever you ask. But directing is like organizing an environment, and you can have an unsafe environment if you're a total genius, like Kubrick torturing the woman in The Shining. Like, yeah, maybe he got something real out of her, you know? But you get to the area where you're wondering if that's correct, you know, if it's right. And, you know, he allowed Nicholson to be over the top, and that's okay too. But it was in the service of something deeply unsettling, you know? I'm not sure I could do a movie like that, you know? I mean, it's so messed up and so... And, you know, at the same time as you have a lot of hints in his story of child abuse and whatever, you know, the control is the lack of control is in the childhood. I think that's true of most people, you know?
So is it easier for you when you are friends with your actors?
Not really. You know, movies are not... Well, maybe in Europe, like where you would have a society of like-minded individuals, you'd have friends and all, but every movie is a new family, you know, and you get very family-like, and then you all disappear. So it becomes like a family, and then it disappears. And it might be a replacement for a family. Like I was thinking last night, while we were talking, that I have very few boundaries. You know, like, I don't care too much about revealing stuff about myself. And that might be because my mother and father started a lodging house, which is, you know, to have lodgers. So you have people sleeping next to you who you didn't know last week. And you have fellas getting drunk out of their fucking head, you know, like, and you've met everybody that you could meet, you know. And so the thing that happens with a nuclear family, the walls that exist kind of disappear. And you have both a father in the main house, my dad, and a father within the lodgers. You always have a father figure within both structures. And I was good at watching my dad, and I'm good at kind of being the father figure, you know? But that sometimes just means the authority figure, but I only use authority very, very, very rarely. But if I get in a conflict, I won't back down. I just won't back down, you know? And that could be with Daniel or Richard Harris or anybody. And so sometimes I get into a stalemate, you know, but, you know, you're on a movie and it's kind of, it's a bit weird, you know? It's like you have a structure where, let's say you're the director and somebody comes up to you and they're going like, do you realize that the actors didn't have their turnaround? Do you know what the turnaround is? You know, like 2 or 3 hours off or on top of the 8 hours sleep. And they're talking to me and I've been up 48 hours straight. And it's totally unsafe. And they're actually in an unbelievable moral universe of, yeah, the actors didn't have a turnaround. Are you aware of that, Jim? You know, I'm like, yeah, I am. Yeah. And you know what I mean? So you kind of get into a place of a movie's like a train on tracks. It's going to knock everybody down unless you control it.
Any questions about actors? No? Okay, here's one. Please wait for the mic.
You all said that you don't use storyboards. Is it truth?
What a day. Now, why would I use a storyboard?
Well, I mean, if you want to tell the actors, you know, what is on the scene, so you just, you know, put it on a storyboard and you just follow the film like that. So if you don't use it, how do you tell them what you mean, and if you let them go according to their feelings?
Like a storyboard is like a visual illustration of. So you do a storyboard of, let's do a storyboard of this talk. What are you going to do? Draw the two of us sitting in 2 chairs? And then a shot here and a shot here. But what if I want to get up and say storyboards are crap and they don't work? Am I allowed to say that if the storyboard has me sitting? So it's just, in a movie, if you do like marks on the ground for an actor, let's say the light only works if the actor's here and he has to hit this mark, and you'll see it in the old movies. You know, the Cary Grants, they're doing that and then they get here. And in Hitchcock, the light always hits them correctly, and most actors know where the light is and blah, blah. But that's old-fashioned. That's yesterday. That's because once you have marks, you have an unconscious difference between what you would call reality. And everything shifts towards capturing the essence or the truth of a person. So the more you go on, you get the Brando, then you get a development with De Niro, and I would say a development with Daniel Day, that they're getting closer to a reality. But in Daniel's case, he's coming out of training. He's coming out of Bristol Old Vic School, and he's trained to be the young Laurence Olivier. So if there was anything I suggested to, or not even suggested, but forced Daniel, it was like to communicate instead of doing art. You know what I mean? In other words, just to be instead of being artistic. And when you're shooting something, you're just trying to get you're trying to keep all the debris out of the room so that you can get a true emotion. So let's say you go out and you meet you're on a date. You know within 7 seconds, this is fucking no good. This is a disaster, you know. And now you have to go through the whole date or dinner or whatever. It's kind of like that, you know. You know straight away with the actors, he's right, he's not. But we're so sophisticated as human beings in picking up emotions if we allow them to tell themselves, that everything we put in the way just gets in the way. Like the right brain logic painting storyboards. I think it could work in certain regards, in certain areas, but it breaks it down into cartoon pictures. And I think you can do that, and you can, you know, you'd storyboard Spider-Man or, you know, anything like that, you know, where it's a lot of people, a lot of control, and it probably would work, you know, and it'd probably work better if I knew how to storyboard and did it to certain parts of the film, but I just don't think that way too much, you know.
Well, speaking about the complete control of Marvel in the movies, I would advise anyone to read about the bullying power of Marvel regarding visual effects and all those changes done in the very last moments before the film is going to hit the screens. But speaking about actors, there is one very specific case, because you also did a film with 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Trying. So he's not an actor. So was it different in this time?
In the sense of he's not an actor, you mean he's not a trained actor, yeah. He's a singer, performer. There were some difficulties in that movie that were the result of social conditioning that I wasn't fully aware of, you know? And, you know, when we made that movie, his music was playing to everybody, white kids, black kids. And when we came to do the first preview, I was on Paramount lot, and the next thing I see, imagine I'm looking at you and you've all turned black. That's literally what happened. It was a white lot, and then one day everybody was black, and they had invited a black audience to see the movie. And I was like, why are you fucking inviting a black audience? I know what they think. I need to see what a white audience think. And they weren't going to market to a white audience. But a lot of the time, let's say you do a John Wayne character and you cut to a silent John Wayne, you kind of know what he's thinking. I'm not sure you can do that with 50, who has such a reputation for being a gangster rapper. Like, the audience are going, I wonder what he's thinking. Do you know what I mean? They're a bit scared, so they're kind of like, I wonder what he's thinking. They're not with him in the same sense they would be with a white star. And yet with Denzel, you'd get a lot more, oh, I know what he's thinking. But that's because they've seen him in a lot of movies. But so they had a limit for urban movies at the time. 35 million was the box office number they wanted to hit. And then they did Black Panther, and they worked it to the whole world, big odd, and it made $1 billion. So that's the first black movie that was actually put to through the Hollywood ringer, and all the money spent on promotion, and it worked. And so a lot of the time they make up their mind that a movie won't work. But I think Netflix tells you the truth. They made 2,000 movies nobody saw. They don't care. They're just like, somebody will see them. And so it's just, there's no, you know, there's no oversight. There's no artistic oversight, no curation. Just put it out and enough will see it to keep the dollars rolling in, you know? And like they might do Rain Man or, sorry, The Irishman or, you know, other expensive movies, but that's only to get the publicity. That's not to actually have oversight. So they do Roma and Irishman and whatever, but I think they're going to have to change their tune about how they make movies, you know?
Any more questions? Yeah, go on. Here.
May I ask you, in the movie The Field, you had a hard time with legendary Richard Harris. Was it because you were, well, he was a star and you were a relatively new director and he thought that he knew the best? Or what was the reason? His alcoholism?
No, he wasn't on the drink at the time. He was sober. It was just that we had a difference of opinion about the character. And O'Toole was kind of had learned the Hollywood system. And in the Hollywood system, they would, sometimes if they wanted to change it, they would use wide shots and revoice it. And I think O'Toole told them, don't act in the wide shots. Wait till they come in on you to act, to give your best performance. And I think I drove him crazy enough that he was acting in the wide shots, you know. It's like, but the moment that was weird for me was he did a scene early on, which was a big speech he had, and I thought he's overacting, you know, and then he took his hat off and cried into his hat. And I was like, he's not even fucking crying. You know what I mean? Like, it's a fake, you know? And then it got worse for me, and I was like, oh, when will I say cut? But I let it go. And when it got to cut, I just went, cut. And the entire crew was clapping. So the first AD started clapping, then the cameraman started clapping, then the hair and makeup clapped, everybody clapped, and I was still down, and Harris was looking at me, and I had never had a movie that came out at that stage. My Left Foot wasn't out. And so eventually I had to come up, and I decided I had to say something real. So I said, that's the most over-the-top acting I've ever seen. You know, the most exaggerated. And we did about 7 takes, and by the 7th take, he was like, I'm not acting. He was shouting at me. And I was shouting back, good. And so, but the difference was that he did this scene. Then I, at that time, wasn't aware, like, really, what's the difference? So I said to him, so we'll rebuild this. So I ordered the carpenters to rebuild the scene in the studio. We were on location, but I built the scene in a studio in Dublin. And I think that control, I'm good at militaristic control. So although I give total leeway, I knew that fucking tells him, I'm not happy with it. And we're going to shoot it on the last day, yeah? And when he saw the scene, he wouldn't repeat it. He wouldn't do it in the studio. Because he said, I can't act better than that. And he could be right, you know, because the way he acted probably fed into every scene. And he was very good, but it was just my instinct was different, you know? I thought that the audience should hate him and get tired of their hate and then start to pity him and then feel oh, I've hated him for so long and now I understand them and be guilty. And it was a scene that actually I told last night about my mother dying when my grandmother gave birth to her, and when I went to her grave and to the house next door, the people, as I'm who don't know me, walking up to them went, "Let's bring the hay in first," which is what the scene was. I don't know, you haven't seen the movie, I don't think, but basically Harris has to say that his mother is out cutting the hay, and he's working with his father and his mother, and she falls down, and the father runs to her, and it becomes apparent that she's dying or is dead. And, you know, the last few lines are like, "My mother fell back, keeled over," so to speak, you know. We ran to her, and my father said, "Fetch a priest. Fetch a priest." I said, "Let's bring the hay in first. Let's bring the hay in first." It's like a crushed fucking 10-year-old that's going to go with survival, and his mother can go to hell. You know what I mean? Like, the implication was the mother is going to hell, and he's going to allow his mother spiritually to go there to survive. That's kind of, and it's scary kind of idea, and difficult, and I suppose I mean, Harris is amazing in the film, so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying his performance is wrong, I'm just saying it's different to what I thought. No, I don't need a break.
Any more questions? We would skip you for anyone else, to have anyone else also. Over there, please.
Thank you. One of my favorite films by you is the film Brothers. Do you know or have an idea what happened to Sam after the ending? Thanks.
Sam is Toby Maguire, is it? Yeah, I think he was okay after the ending, you know. That was a remake of a Susanna Bier movie. It was... it had its own, like after the 50 Cent movie, it was the next movie I made in America, and it had 3 stars, and, you know, with a new studio, Relativity, and the main problem was that the studio always gave in to the stars, you know. You'd say no hair and makeup, just everybody has to have the same hair and makeup. And then Toby, you'd have some person who was fucking haired and makeup, and I'd go, "No, Toby, you can't have that person." And then they'd be there the next day, and I'd go to the studio and say, "Why has Toby got his own hair and makeup?" And they'd say, "Oh, no, they're not haired and makeup. They're," they pick another word, you know, like stylists or whatever, you know. It's like, so it's very hard. You're in a position of authority and power, but actually the power is with the financiers. So you're like a director is like a fuse in a fuse box. How much pressure can he take before he explodes? and so, like on the 50 Cent movie, that was really there. I think he's okay, Sam, at the end. It's a good question, though. I mean, I think I don't know what happened to Sam at the end. He could have been knocked down by a bus, you know, the next stage. You know what I mean? It's like, it's hard. If you ask questions what happened to them before the movie or after, it's not within the world of the movie, you know. So it's not understandable. That leakage doesn't occur, I don't think. I suspect he was okay. But the 50 Cent movie was a perfect example of studio. And so there was this director, and a helicopter had landed and somebody died and they blamed the director. And so on the 50 Cent, when 50 was in Toronto, he was kind of invisible. Nobody in Toronto understood rap. So he was like the biggest star in the world in the Bronx and New York, and nobody in Toronto. And I think it destabilized him. And he's a really great guy, a great worker, great artist, great manager. And when he got back to New York with me on the recce's, you know, going around checking locations, he had $1,000. So he had like, whatever, a $100 bill, 10 tens, and 800 singles. And he'd go out on the street in the Bronx and throw the money in the air, and the kids would all come scampering for it. And for the kids to get $1 off 50 cents was the same as 100. They just all wanted to get. He was Robin Hood. He saw himself as the guy liberating his community. And I said to him, look, 50, it's okay doing that on the recce, but we're on the set. You can't do that. And he was like, okay. But on the set, he did do it. And I went up to him in the car and said, don't do that again, you know. And I got a feeling he might, you know. So I got his manager. And I said, it's dangerous if 50 does that. And then I got the policeman on the set, Ray. And I said, Ray, if 50 throws the money again, arrest him. And then he said, okay. And then I rang the head of the studio, who was Brad Gray. And I said, Brad, we have a situation here, blah, blah. Now, the reason I was doing that was I felt it could get out of control a little bit. And what happened next was 50 said he wouldn't throw the money, but he went up in the car up the hill in the Bronx, threw the money, and all the kids were scampering around for it. And it really got dangerous. Then they had to get out of there, and they were reversing cars and pulling kids out of the way. And then what happens is the first AD, who is a man called Daniel Loopy, a wonderful first, said to me, well, will I talk to 50? And that's the same as I had with Richard Harris and everybody else. The minute you get somebody else to do your job, your power goes down, you know what I mean? You just lose authority. So I said, no, I'll go in, I'll talk to 50. And what happened was I went in, and he was with all his crew. And I knew one particular guy who had been in a fight. I saw him in a fight. Saw him with a knife. So I held his knife hand. And I said to 50, like, you know, don't do that. I thought you were a gangster. If you're a gangster, get a gun, fucking shoot somebody, but don't be throwing money around for kids to get hurt, you know? And everybody in the room were really scared, because by this stage, there was a war on between 50 and the game, and they were all shooting each other and everything. And I just said what I had to say and left the trailer. And 50 came after me, and he's like, Jim, yeah. He's like, what? He's like, I just thought about what you said. You're right. Right? So I took out the piece of paper with the names of all the people, his manager, the policeman, the head of the studio, the first AD, the cameraman. I said, you have to apologize to all of them. And he went around methodically apologizing to every single person. And it was a big lesson to me, you know, because he then said, you're my father.
A on mi potom řekl, ty jsi jako můj otec. On totiž nikdy otce neměl, nikdy neměl nějakou otcovskou figuru ve svém životě.
Nice to him, you know what I mean? Nice lying to him. But somehow, I don't know, I feel that I knew before I went in that's the type of person he was. And we got on great. We were great friends. But the interesting thing for the policeman, I went to Ray and I said to the policeman, you told me you'd arrest 50. And he's like, yeah. And I said, but you didn't. He said, no. I said, why is that? And he looked at his cops and he said, Jim, do you think we can arrest a black rapper in the Bronx? I said, well, yeah. And I saw his hand shaking. I said, what's wrong with you, Ray? Why are you so nervous? And he goes, well, I was in the towers, which is the Twin Towers. I said, oh, God, sorry about that. I said, so you lost, your nerves went, yeah? He said, yeah. I said, so let me get this right. Your nerves went, you were in the Twin Towers, you have post-traumatic stress, and the head honchos and the police got together and said, where can we put Ray? Right? And they decided, put him on a movie set, because that's not the real world. So I said, Ray, it is the fucking real world. You know what I mean? But that's what happens on a movie set. People, even at the highest levels, think it's not a real world. And they start applying, and they let abusive situations develop, and you know what it's like. Movies.
Could you share your experiences with us from editing room, especially on those films that were done under studios wings, Universal, Fox, and
yeah?
So
well, the editing room is just another way of telling the story. So you're cutting out the bits that don't work, or the bits that are too long, or the bits that shouldn't have been there in the first place. And you know, editors are like people who are always saying, but that's not what you shot. You know what I mean? Like, so they're the ones who are saying, but you didn't shoot that, you shot this. And so it's an experience of being presented with your failures and then trying to get it into a shape. And you can tell a lot through editing, you know, like in America had a scene that, you know, they didn't understand what the main guy, who was me, wanted, and I had to reshoot that. But I didn't reshoot it like, how do I explain it? So, remember there was a camcorder in that. There was a camcorder that the little kid was shooting, a camera. So I had a good camcorder. And I would shoot the scenes that I needed in the movie and put them into the movie and show them to the studio. And they weren't aware that I'd never shot that scene in the main shoot. They were just, okay, what's next? And I wasn't never showing them the finished movie. So I kept refining the movie with an audience. I'm probably the only director, one of the few in the world that does this. Because I come from a place so far outside the mainstream in Ireland that I have to check what I'm doing against the the American audience, basically. So I would keep changing the movie until I get the numbers up, till the audience numbers go up to 90 like it. And then I'd say to the studios, by the way, we didn't shoot any of those scenes. And now I'd get the money to reshoot it. But if I asked for the money to reshoot it, they'd never give it to me. And not only that, but they'd say, this movie's a failure. Because the structure of making movies is kind of like the Henry Ford assembly line, you know? It's cookie cutter. And mostly people who are making movies, they've lost the audience in the first 10 minutes. I've seen hundreds of movies where if you change the first 10 minutes, it's a different movie. But, you know, within the subsidized structure, there is no openness to the real world. Like, I'm sure nobody in Czechoslovakia goes and shows their movie in England or France or even in Slovenia before they put it out. They just make it and put it out. And that seems to me a crazy, crazy way. It's like talking to yourself in a mirror. You know, how long do you have to talk to yourself in the mirror before you go mad? How long do you have to keep making the same movie that doesn't explain your culture to the outside world? Like, And at some point, you got to test it against reality. Does it hit? Is it sitting with people? And like, just to put it this way, Scorsese movies had, I'll put it this way, the structure of the box office in America when I was making the movies was, the first row here was Woody Allen. That's about 20 million. There's one, because it's Jewish New York, intellectual, whatever. The next up was like about 35 million, which was what they called urban movies, black focused movies. The next structure up was 60 million, which was Scorsese, Italian, Irish, but American Irish. Any movies with family, any movies with complicated family arrangements. And if Woody Allen managed to make a movie that was like family and understandable, he could get into the 60 million bracket. And then the 100 million or 200 million or now billion movie was a very different movie. It was essentially individualism, like Make My Day, like the hero character who's going to revenge everybody. And that was the one that played across America with royal family movies, whatever. But nobody ever broke the box office up like that because they were making too much money to worry about it. And I was always trying to get my movies from the Irish one, which is 500,000, into the 60 million bracket, which is very difficult. And a lot of that is like, if you overdo that, you become like cookie cutter, you know? You become like too controlled. But you have to do some of it, you know?
Are films like Parasite, or, I don't know, some of the most favorite Mexican directors able to change the situation in this regard?
I would say Parasite and the Mexican directors are at the exact opposite end of two scales. The Mexican directors are ultra wealthy geniuses who've managed to get into the American system, help each other, cooperate with each other, and break through as auteur, independent. You couldn't write the rules for those guys because they were so talented, Alfonso and Inarritu and Guillermo especially. Guillermo probably my favorite, but you know, who are you comparing them to? The Parasite is like the opposite end of the scale. That's kind of, Parasite comes from a culture that's capitalist in extreme. It's just America transferred to Korea. Now, when America did the Marshall Plan in Europe, they forced the Italians, the Japanese, and one other country, I can't remember, to dub their movies in English. That was part of the plan. So the Italians understood America better than any other country in Europe, and the Japanese as well. And perversely, their movies start working in America. Korea is that in extreme. So Koreans are making kind of working class movies that no American is making because working class is obscured by racism in America. Basically, people think working class in America is racism. It's black people who are going to take your job. So the myth has been spread in America that instead of there's a class divide, there's a racial divide. And so long as the actual really rich people can convince people that there's a racial divide at the root of everything, they're going to do that.
Back to the editing room, is it easy for you to decide between several takes, like regarding especially actors or actresses?
Sometimes if I don't mark the take when I'm doing it on the set, I don't know which one is better when I go into the editing room. You know? I can't tell. It's like they're all the same. You know, and then I think, why did I spend all that day shooting 5 takes? I should have just stuck with the first one. And I think that's mostly true, that what you get by repeating it doesn't help often, you know? It's kind of, film just loves freshness, authenticity, first take. It's hard. It's hard after that.
Some more questions? We are slowly running out of time, so any more questions?
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
Hand up here who are writers. Writers, yeah. Higher up with the hands. Okay, who are directors? Anybody here is a director? One. Who are actors? Actors. You're an actor. Actors. And the rest just love film, is that it? Yeah. That's good. Because often I need to know who, you know.
So any advice in the end for them? For this mixture of
Well, I
professions
think,
and-
you know, I was talking mostly about the art, you know, the craft of it, you know, the overview. You know, to learn how to appreciate movies, I don't know how to do that, you know. Like, I still look at 2001 and I'm thinking, what's it about? Do you know what it's about?
I thought, but then I rewatched and then I didn't.
No, like 2001, I know there's some genius in it, but I'm always wondering what's the story. Does anybody here know what the story is? Do you know the movie? Hand up who saw 2001. Okay. Here's what I think. I think Kubrick was making some version of the guy is reborn as a star child hero, you know. And it's like he goes through all these acid trips and whatever. And it's kind of like some primitive rebirthing. But I think what actually happened within the movie was, you remember Hal, the computer? Okay, I would say that Hal is the best performance that Kubrick got out of any actor. And that's because he had total control. You know what I mean? For a person who needs total control, they have to go all the way. And Hal is all the way. So, you know, it's heartbreaking when he gets to those scenes, you know. I'm a HAL 2000 computer. I was born and made in the United States. And you're kind of feeling for the fucking computer in the way you never felt for any character in a Kubrick movie. And thrown into that is there's a weird fact, which is Hal was originally a woman. So, you know, when you're in London, if you're everywhere, but actually if you get into any elevator, you know, it's always this English lady saying, stand clear of the doors. We are now at the exit. You know, it's a very posh English lady's voice. That's who Hal was. But if you do that, you change the movie so fundamentally that Kubrick realized he couldn't stick with that. So he went for the total opposite, deep male. I wouldn't say he knew. But if you look at, say, Space Odyssey and the two astronauts go out on the umbilical cord to repair the damaged ship. And if the seeing eye is a female eye, then the males are kind of aborting the mission, and the mission is actually an abortion. And when you come back in, you're actually aborting the female consciousness. You know what I mean? And so that becomes a fucking heavy movie. Now, then the male characters, having got rid of this mothership or gotten out of the mothership, are now in a different space. But if you take that and you apply it to religion, and you take what we do, I don't know if you do here, when a child is baptized, we say, I baptize thee in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. No women involved. So it's almost as if Western culture had to take the bloody, you know, child covered in goo, wash the child and make it clean, which is original sin. So these are the foundational institutions and thought patterns of how we live in the world. And I think it's all fucked up myself. So baptism, like some people would say that baptism is not a cleansing but a return to the womb, but I don't know if I buy that, you know. So you know, it's very hard for, you know, to be honest, for me to write a female character is kind of hard, because what was it Jack Nicholson said in that movie? He said you take a female character and then you just you write her like a man. You know, that's basically, and that's kind of, it's the, I find, the only way I can approach it is kind of like that, you know? Because I think we get trapped within our gender, and, you know, here's the thing, you know, the best kiss in a movie for me is Cinema Paradiso. Do you remember that? Where the whole movie was all these scenes that were cut out of the movie by the priest, and at the end, they're all edited together. So you see like 50 kisses from all the trims that's in the projection room. Now, when I was a kid and we went to the Cowboys and Indians, every time the woman, the love interest, who usually wasn't a good main character, every time the cowboy kissed her, all the kids would boo in the street I lived on. They go, boo. Literally, they'd hiss at the screen. And then a lot of people thought they were uncouth, stupid infants. But I think deep down, they knew the movie has stopped. Because when you integrate energies as powerful as the male and female in a kiss, you've suggested an ending. That integration is very difficult to surpass as a writer. You know, it's like, it's almost not, you can't get past it, you can't recover. That has to be the last scene in the movie, the integration of those energies. Otherwise, it's misplaced. So the 8-year-old kids know more than the people making the movies, I think. Except the people making the movies are trying to get the female audience, so they'll put the kiss in the middle.
Do you teach film?
No. I don't. Maybe I should.
You should.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, I don't know. But it's kind of going out now, film, you know, it's like, film itself has disappeared. It's now pixels, which is different to film. Film was a different structure with, like, in film, the edges of the picture are all out of focus. It's only the middle portion that's in focus. Whereas in pixels, everything's in focus. Much harder to watch. And in film, there's a break 24 times a second. So so there's some correlation that I don't quite understand between heartbeats and vision. And if you were ever in a really stressful situation of survival, where your life was actually on the line, you'll know that the world slows down. It just slows so fucking much that it's almost like you're dying in slow motion. And you get a chance to intervene in ways that if you were normal, you wouldn't. Because your heart has beat up so fast. It's at such extreme stress that time shifts. And a little shift in time is like a little bit of slow motion, very obvious. And if you were a fly and you landed and somebody went to hit you with a paper, you can see the paper coming a mile away. Because flies' hearts are going at a tremendous rate. So their vision is much more acute. And if you were a fly, you'd see all that part here, this black bit in the frames. You'd see it all. And it wouldn't fool your eye. So our system was correlated, our emotional, internal heart system was correlated to film. Whereas there's no correlation with pixels. In fact, not only is there no correlation, but we have a word for it. That's all surface. So when you say something's all surface, it has no depth. When something hasn't got depth, you don't believe it. So people don't believe digital. They know it's made, digital's made for marvel. It's made for adjustment of the surface. Oscar Wilde would have been probably the greatest fucking writer for digital, because he had that, you know, ability to be surface and deep, which is almost impossible. And requires such anger and whatever. But the pixels and the whole, so when they advanced first into DVDs and CDs and DVDs, that was the size, or bigger, of the subtitles. When you saw that on the screen on a small TV, it was less than half the size of this. So it became too difficult a thing to watch. So each advance technologically goes simpler, goes to more primitive storytelling, simpler and simpler and simpler, till you're getting down to simple that the whole world audience gets, you know? And all they want to do is come in and be entertained. And I'm like, well, they can fuck off, you know? Because there's too much entertainment in the world. That's my belief. And we need some kind of new code of ethical, moral presentation that's not just making money out of, you know, and you can't get that, you know. Here's what I was in favour of. I put the homeless in Ireland into a building in 2016 on the anniversary of the revolution, because I thought, well, we bought these buildings through the taxpayers' money, so we owe them. We own them. So therefore, if they're homeless or on the streets and have no home to go to, I'll put them all in this big building. It's a government building. Of course, it caused chaos. But when everybody homeless came in, I realised they're all strung out, you know, and most of them had alcohol or drug problems, and they stayed up all night. I was very tempted when the next big Netflix movie came along to show it in cinemas and charge on the way out. Like, contribute whatever you want. So instead of giving £20, you might give 30, or you might give 5. And when Netflix would come to me and say, you can't do that, I would say, well, what do you mean? They were all my friends. And they'd say, yeah, but how much did you get? And I'd say, I don't give out my data. I don't give out my data. You know, isn't it time for a bit of piracy backwards. Do you know what I mean? In other words, a bit of stealing from them, who are stealing from us, and a bit of rock and roll in the film world, bit of Sex Pistols, bit of fight back. I just don't get it. Nobody does anything, you know? And, you know, they write contracts that shouldn't be allowed. There's labor laws that they go by. I'm not just talking about Netflix, I'm talking about the whole streaming industry. Forget me being teaching film. I teach unions how to act.
So you're a storyteller and also a revolutionary a little bit.
No, not revolutionary. I'm a union guy. I'm like, let's get a fair deal here. Look, what they call diversity only happens within America. Outside of America, there's no diversity. Diversity is a concept that occurs at the highest level of the social organization. It only occurs at the highest social levels that you can say, oh, we have to have black people and we have to have gay people and we have to have Asians and we have to have... But the real Asians can go fuck off over in Asia because their movies don't get made. And the real blacks in Africa don't get their movies made or at least exhibited in the same way. And nobody pays attention to them. But the diversity occurs within the power culture.
Okay, thank you very much for coming, and thanks again to Jim Sheridan.